Rain tapped gently against the windows of the tiny Oregon auto shop, the kind of steady rhythm that made the whole place feel quieter than usual. Emily pushed open the glass door and rolled inside, her wheelchair caster wobbling with each turn. She tried to hide her frustration behind a polite smile, but Jake, the quiet mechanic who rarely spoke more than necessary, noticed the strain in her eyes immediately. He stood from under the hood of a pickup, wiped his hands on a rag, and crouched beside her chair. "Give me an hour," he said simply, as though she had asked for the smallest thing in the world. Emily nodded, grateful but embarrassed at needing help again. Her wheelchair had been her lifeline since the accident 3 years ago, and every broken part felt like a reminder of the life she'd lost. Jake wheeled the chair to his workbench, studying it with the same focus he gave to engines twice its size. Emily waited on a shop stool, shivering a little in her rain-soaked sweater. The sounds of tools clicking, metal being shaved, and bolts being tightened filled the air. But Jake's expression stayed calm and steady, like he was working on something that truly mattered. At first, Emily expected a simple caster replacement, something quick, cheap, and temporary. But the longer she watched, the more she realized Jake wasn't just repairing a part. He examined every joint, every screw, every connection on her chair. He tested the bearings by hand, shook his head, and replaced them. He measured the alignment, checked the frame, and adjusted the axle as though he were tuning a high-performance vehicle. Emily opened her mouth to tell him he didn't need to go that far, but something about the quiet intensity in his eyes kept her silent. As the minutes turned into an hour, then, a little more, Jake's ideas grew bolder. He noticed how worn the front suspension was, a problem Emily had learned to live with. Every crack in the sidewalk, every bump in the street, every uneven curb sent a jolt through her spine. She never complained because she had no one to complain to. Jake, however, saw the issue instantly. Without asking, he began designing a small custom shock absorber system using leftover motorcycle parts from an old project. He worked with steady hands, tightening small bolts with precision, welding small brackets with a care that made Emily's chest tighten. When he finally wheeled the chair back to her, it looked the same at first glance, just cleaner and more polished. Emily gripped the armrests, lifted herself into the seat, and adjusted her posture. The moment her weight settled, she felt its smoothness, stability, something she hadn't felt in years. She pushed forward hesitantly, expecting the familiar rattle, but the wheels glided across the concrete floor as if the bumps weren't even there. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. For a moment, she thought she had imagined it. She pushed harder, turning sharply, then rolling over a metal grate near the door. The chair absorbed the uneven surface gently, like riding over soft moss instead of steel. "What did you do?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jake shrugged, rubbing the back of his neck. "Added some Figured the roads can't be easy." Emily blinked rapidly, her eyes burning. No one had gone out of their way for her like this, not since the accident. Not since the world had quietly stepped away from her life. "No one's ever done something like this for me," she said, tears finally spilling despite her effort to hold them back. Jake looked startled by her reaction, almost confused by the weight of her gratitude. He wasn't used to recognition. He was used to engines, gears, and machines that didn't talk. But something in Emily's voice softened him. "You deserve a chair that works right," he said gently. Emily wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand, embarrassed yet unable to stop the emotion. She rolled again, marveling at how smooth it felt, how effortless. The shop felt different, now brighter, warmer, as though her gratitude had filled the space. Jake leaned against his work desk, watching her test the wheels like someone rediscovering movement. Emily couldn't remember the last time her chair moved without pain. "This is incredible," she murmured. Jake shrugged again, the corners of his mouth lifting in the smallest smile. "Just did what anyone should have done." But Emily knew that wasn't true. Plenty of mechanics would have done the bare minimum. Plenty of people saw her wheelchair, but not the person sitting in it. Jake had seen both. As the rain softened outside, she finally asked, "How much do I owe you?" Jake hesitated, then shook his head. "Nothing." Emily blinked in disbelief. "Jake, this is more than a repair. You rebuilt the whole thing." He avoided her eyes, busying himself with rearranging the tools on his workbench. "Doesn't matter," he muttered. "Some things shouldn't have a price." Emily's chest tightened again, this time not with sadness, but with a warmth she hadn't felt in a long while. She rolled back toward him, the chair gliding silently across the floor. "Thank you," she said softly. Jake finally met her eyes, and for a brief second, something unspoken passed between them, gratitude, admiration, maybe even the beginning of something neither of them had expected. She didn't want to leave, not yet, but the storm outside had calmed, and she knew he had other work waiting. Still, she lingered near the door, looking back at him. "You really changed something for me today," she said. "More than you know." Jake nodded, looking slightly overwhelmed, but quietly proud. After Emily left, the shop felt unusually still. He stared at the empty space she had occupied moments earlier, replaying the way her face had lit up when she tried the upgraded chair. He hadn't planned to spend the afternoon rebuilding her wheelchair, but something about her quiet resilience, her tired smile had made him want to help in a way he couldn't explain. Outside, Emily rolled down the sidewalk, testing the chair on different surfaces. Each bump met the new suspension gently. Each uneven patch felt smooth. People passed her without noticing anything unusual, but Emily felt like a piece of her freedom had been returned. She realized how much she had adapted to discomfort, how she had convinced herself that pain was normal. But now, for the first time in years, the world felt manageable again. The sun began to peek through the retreating clouds, casting warm light on the wet pavement. As she made her way home, she couldn't stop smiling. She kept replaying Jake's words, the way he'd said she deserved better, the sincerity in his voice. No one had told her that in a long time. She wondered what kind of person notices small details about someone else's struggle and quietly decides to fix them. Meanwhile, Jake cleaned his tools slowly, lost in thought. The garage smelled of rain and engine oil, but something felt different, lighter. He didn't know why helping her had affected him so deeply. He had repaired hundreds of vehicles, dozens of wheelchairs, but none had stayed on his mind afterward. Emily did. Her gratitude, her tears, her surprise, it lingered with him. Long after she left the shop, Emily reached her apartment building and rolled up the ramp effortlessly. She paused before going inside, turning the wheels gently just to feel the smooth glide again. She whispered to herself, "He didn't just fix it, he gave me back a part of my life." And deep down she wondered when she would see him again, and whether she wanted this one small moment to be the end of their story or the beginning. The next morning, New York was already awake before the sun fully settled over the skyline. Emily wheeled through the crowded streets, the city buzzing around her with its usual relentless pace. Delivery trucks honked, pedestrians pushed past one another, and steam drifted up from subway grates. Yet for the first time in months, Emily didn't feel the familiar stiffness building in her shoulders. Her chair glided, smooth and warm beneath her. She frowned slightly, adjusting her posture. There was a gentle heat spreading through the seat, steady, comforting, almost soothing. She hadn't turned anything on. She hadn't changed anything. And then she felt it. Jake's signature quiet kindness. She slowed near a street corner, letting the crowd spill around her as she lifted the cushion slightly. Tucked beneath it was a small heated pad, neatly installed and wired with more care than she'd ever seen in a device so simple. Beside the armrest, barely noticeable, was a tiny switch marked only with a small arrow. Her breath caught when she saw the folded note taped underneath. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. The handwriting was plain, sturdy, and familiar from the signature he'd left on a receipt once. "You deserve comfort, not just mobility." The words were simple, but they struck deep. She covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes stinging with sudden emotion. The city noise faded into the background as she sat there on the corner of 43rd Street, reading the note again and again. No one had thought of these things for her. No one had paid attention to the small discomforts she silently endured every day. She'd grown used to cold winters cutting through the metal of her chair, used to numb legs that froze even though she couldn't feel them. She had accepted it as part of her reality. But Jake, quiet, awkward, gentle Jake from a tiny shop in Oregon, had seen all of that without her saying a word. As she continued down the block, the warmth from the heated pad radiated through her lower back, easing muscles that constantly flared with tension. She found herself smiling despite the chilly wind blowing between the buildings. She remembered the look on Jake's face when she thanked him the day before, the shy glance away, the faint pink in his cheeks, the way his hands fidgeted with the tools on his workbench. He wasn't a man seeking praise. He simply did things because he believed people should be treated with dignity. It had been a long time since someone treated her that way. Passing a coffee cart, she ordered a latte and took a moment to breathe in the rising steam. An elderly woman beside her glanced at the wheelchair and smiled politely before shuffling away. Emily wasn't offended. She was used to people not knowing what to say. But as she sipped her coffee, she found her fingers drifting back to the note in her coat pocket. "You deserve comfort." The words echoed in her mind. Comfort was something she hadn't allowed herself to want since the accident. Survival had become her routine. Independence, her armor. But warmth, gentleness, those had been foreign for too long. She continued toward Bryant Park, the winter wind brushing her hair as she rolled along the path. The heated pad kept her steady, and every bump in the pavement was softened by Jake's upgraded suspension system. She felt weightless, almost as though someone had taken invisible burdens off her shoulders. She closed her eyes for a moment and let the cold air sting her cheeks. She could still picture Jake bent over her chair, welding small pieces with the devotion of a craftsman restoring something precious. He didn't just fix machines, he restored dignity, and she wondered how many others he had quietly helped without expecting anything in return. When she reached the park, she paused near a fountain, its surface crusted with thin layers of winter ice. She watched children chase pigeons, couples sip hot chocolate, and workers rush past absorbed in their phones. Her life had once been like theirs, constant movement, deadlines, plans. After the accident, everything had shifted. She had lost friends slowly, one by one, as their lives continued and hers changed. People cared, but didn't understand. They tried, but eventually drifted away, and she learned to do everything alone. She told herself she didn't need kindness. She told herself she didn't miss it, but Jake showed her that she did. She thought back to their first conversation. Jake hadn't asked what happened to her. He hadn't stared. He hadn't offered pity disguised as compassion. He had simply looked at her wheelchair like a problem he could solve, and at her like a person he respected. That alone had meant more than she could admit. Now, with this heated pad warming her spine, she realized he had thought about her discomfort long after she'd left his shop. She wondered when he installed it. Did he stay up late crafting the wiring? Did he smile to himself imagining her surprise? Did he worry she might find it strange? A sudden gust of wind made Emily pull her coat tighter. She noticed something else, then the chair didn't squeak anymore. The bearings Jake replaced made each movement nearly silent. It felt like the world was opening up again, piece by piece. A warmth rose in her chest, not from the heater, but from something deeper and far more dangerous. Hope. She hadn't felt it in years, and it scared her. Kindness had a way of awakening feelings she had buried long ago. She spent the next hour rolling through the park, allowing herself to enjoy the simple pleasure of movement. The city, with all its chaos, felt less hostile, less overwhelming. She imagined telling Jake how much this meant to her. She imagined Joaquino rolling back into his little organ shop someday, just to see the look in his eyes when she thanked him again. She imagined sitting with him over coffee, talking about things that had nothing to do with repairs or broken parts. She imagined being seen, truly seen, and the thought scared her in its sweetness. When she finally headed back toward her apartment, she kept running her fingers over the switch he'd installed. Such a tiny thing, yet it carried so much care. She wondered how someone like him ended up in a quiet shop far from the city. She wondered if he knew how rare he was. She wondered if he felt the same unspoken pull she did, that subtle, delicate thread, connecting to strangers whose lives touched for a moment, but left an imprint impossible to ignore. She entered her building and wheeled into the elevator. Watching the doors close with a soft metallic sound, for the first time in months, she didn't dread the rest of her day. She had warmth beneath her, smooth wheels beneath her hands, and a note in her pocket that made her heart swell with something she wasn't ready to name. She rolled into her apartment, placed the coffee on the counter, and sat in the quiet. In that stillness, she read the note again. You deserve comfort, not just mobility. The words were small, handwritten, but they unraveled something inside her. She pressed the note to her chest and allowed herself to finally not from sadness, but from the unfamiliar kindness of being cared for. Jake didn't know it, but he hadn't just fixed her chair. He hadn't just added warmth to cold mornings. He had given her back something she thought she had lost forever, the belief that she was worth gentle things. That night, as the city glowed outside her window, she lay awake thinking of Jake's quiet eyes, his careful hands, the way he had looked at her like she wasn't broken. And somewhere in the soft hum of New York's night, she made a quiet decision. She wasn't going to let this be the end of their story.